students. Welcome to the contemporary world. Last meeting, you learned what is the global economy and market integration as parts of the structures of globalization. Today, we will continue our discussion, and our lesson for today is all about the structures of globalization, focusing on the global interstate system. We have three learning outcomes to achieve by the end of this topic. First, explain the effects of globalization on government. Identify the institutions that govern international relations. And third, differentiate internationalism from globalism. These are the seats of some of the governments of the world. We have the capital, Washington, D.C., Malacanang Palace, Manila, Palace of Westminster, London, Secretariat Building, New Delhi. The government has the sovereignty over its own territory. So, when we say sovereignty, it means that the government of one country has the supreme authority over all things in making laws and controlling the resources. Decisions, conflict resolution, countrywide planning, and development plans are done through the different government institutions. Activities of the civil societies like the private enterprises, churches, healthcare providers, professional and business organizations, and non-government organizations are supplementary to the government. How does globalization affect government? Globalization has brought several challenges to the government. These can be divided into four challenges. Traditional challenges, challenges from national or identity movements, global economics, and global social movements. First, let us look at the traditional challenges. One of the traditional challenges brought by globalization to the government is the external intervention by other countries. Some powerful nations intervene with the territorial integrity or political interdependence of other weaker nations. Example, Russia's annexation of Crimea from Ukraine in 2014. As a result, there is current conflict between Ukraine not recognizing Crimea's sovereignty and Russia not recognizing Ukraine's sovereignty over Crimea. Another traditional challenge brought by globalization to governments is the internal political challenges. These are challenges that come from the state's own internal dissenters. An example is Arab Spring in Egypt was a series of uprisings which led to the overthrowing of its leader. This was subsequently followed by the creation of a new constitution and establishment of a new government in order to restore stability in the country. The third traditional challenge brought by globalization to governments in regional organizations challenging state autonomy. The United Nations intervened in Sudan during the Civil War. It focused its efforts on humanitarian, developmental, and recovery interventions. UN also adopted principles to help tackle the sovereign debt crisis of Europe, specifically Greece and unprecedented debt crisis. Let us now look into the challenges from national identity movements. National or identity movements can challenge a nation's cultural identity and state's definite identity due to its specific boundaries or unique ideologies. Examples: the Kurds reside in several different countries, including Iran, Iraq, and Turkey. Scottish nationalism challenged the traditional notion of state sovereignty of Great Britain. Al Qaeda and ISIS movement were based on the fundamentalist version of Islam. The third challenge that globalization brought to governments is global economics. Global economy demands the states to conform the rules of free market capitalism. Example, governments have to comply with global or regional agreements. Example, the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, EU, and ASEAN. Neoliberal economics diminish the rules of government and threatens the states on economic interests and sovereignty. Economic crisis can force governments to subscribe to the terms of the global financial market and of other nations in order for them to regain economic stability. The fourth challenge that globalization brought to governments is global social movements. Spontaneous movements of people, or those that emerge through innermost grassroots organizations such as human rights movement, environmental movement, women's rights movement, right to personal autonomy, includes issues on same-sex marriage and gender equality, immigration. Over time, international organizations, non-government organizations, and global media also have increased roles in challenging state sovereignty. Example, the CNN effect. The effects of globalization to governments have taken many forms. These are some of them. Triggers competition or conflict among countries on matters such as economic policy, political system, human rights, environmental concerns. The effects of globalization to governments have taken many forms. These are some of them. Governments are now dispersed and are dealing with many stakeholders. Horizontally, civil society and market players. Vertically, international organizations and subnational political authorities. The effects of globalization to governments have taken many forms. These are some of them. We have citizens, civil society, organizations, and corporations are now seeking opportunities beyond the borders of their home country. At the same time, the local market faces competition with the influx of foreign players. Because the benefits and costs of globalization are unevenly distributed across governments and population. The impacts of globalization cannot be generalized. International relations refers to the collective interactions or relationships of the international community, which includes nations and states, intergovernmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, and multinational corporations. The institutions that govern international relations are concerned with peace, treaties, and military alliances, social and economic growth, and with the overall global economy. Governments of countries around the world participate in these different institutions. These institutions are the main players in international relations. Let us look at each one of them. The United Nations is a wide network of international organizations, treaties, and conventions. It was founded in 1945 and now has 193 member states. The United Nations has four main charters or purposes. First, help maintain world peace and security. Second, developing relations among nations. Third, help solve economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian international. And fourth, bring countries together to meet the UN's purposes and goals. We also have the United Nations International Court of Justice, is also known as the World Court. It is the judicial body of the United Nations. Its primary charter is to settle international disputes. Another one, we have the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, is an intergovernmental defensive treaty or military alliance signed in 1949, based on the idea of security. It has deployed troops and undertaken military operations, with the US making up most of the organization's forces and operations. Collective self-defense as armed attack on any one of the members means an attack of all of them. For social and economic growth, one of the main actors is Red Cross or Red Crescent in Muslim countries. It is an independent and neutral organization in 1863. Its purpose is to help those who were wounded by wars. Red Cross has helped millions of people affected by conflict, war, and disasters. There are many institutions that are concerned with social and economic growth. Some of them are Doctors Without Borders, Oxfam, Amnesty International, and Save the Children, to name a few. For global economy, World Trade Organization is an organization for liberaling trade, provides a forum for governments to negotiate trade agreements and to settle trade disputes. North American Free Trade Agreement or NAFTA is an economic treaty between the US, Canada, and Mexico, which these countries trade freely without taxing one another. It is now known as United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, effective November 2018. As individuals, we can contribute to international relations by being aware of current events, voting during elections, supporting humanitarian and charitable causes, or simply being a responsible citizen. At the same time, international relations has a very significant impact of our lives as individuals through improvements in communications, education, healthcare, transportation, and human rights. As defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, internationalism is the principle or practice of nations acting and working together. In essence, internationalism is a belief and or a movement that advocates a greater economic, political, and social cooperation among nations. Fried Halliday, an internationalist, defines internationalism as the idea that we both want and should be part of a broader community than that of the nation state we belong to. Halliday's three concepts of internationalism are hegemonic internationalism, revolutionary internationalism, and liberal internationalism. Hegemonic internationalism is the belief that the world is being integrated based on unequal terms, with the dominance of one nation or nation state over others. An example is the British Empire from 16th to 18th century. Up next, we have the revolutionary internationalism. Is the belief that conflicts within societies are determined by international factors and alliances. Examples are the French Revolution, feminism, and environmentalism. Next, we also have the liberal internationalism. Is the belief that through greater interaction and cooperation, nations and nation states can achieve common goals, especially peace and prosperity. Examples are the United Nations and humanitarian aids of NGOs. Cambridge Dictionary states that globalism is the idea that events in one nation cannot be separated from those in another, and that economic and foreign policy should be planned in an international way. In essence, globalism seeks to describe and explain nothing more than a world which is characterized by networks of connections that span multi-continental distances. According to American political sciences Joseph May, there are four distinct dimensions of globalism. These are economic, military, environmental, and social and cultural. Economic globalism, flows of goods, services, and capital. Examples, export and import of goods, e-commerce. While military globalism pertains to the deployment of potential conflict or threats of force of war. Example, balance of terror between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Environment is the transport of materials or substances in the atmosphere or oceans that can affect human health and well-being. Social and cultural globalism is the movement of ideas, information, and people. These models represent the comparison between internationalism and globalism. This chart shows the respective nature of internationalism and globalism. Internationalism supports individualism of nations, while globalism treats nations as global or a single unit. Internationalism focuses on nation to nation ties without impeding on the sovereignty of the nation, while globalism interconnectedness of the world. Internationalism stresses solidarity and cooperation among nations to benefit one another, while globalism, ideology based on the belief that people, goods, and information should be able to cross national borders unrestricted. Internationalism, common interests are more important than individual differences. While globalism, it is not universal. Some parts of the world experience connectedness more than others. Here are some important points which you need to remember in order to understand the effects of globalization to governments. We have the effects of globalization to governments. There are four: traditional challenges, global economics, national identity movements, and global social movements. Under traditional challenges, we have external interventions by other countries, internal political challenges, and regional organizations. And here are the institutions that govern international relations. Under peace treaties and military alliances, we have the United Nations, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. Under social and economic growth, we have Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, Save the Children, Oxfam. And under global economy, we have North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and WTO, World Trade Organization. And here are the diagram that show the key differences between internationalism and globalism. Always remember that internationalism is political, economic, and cultural cooperation between nations, while globalism is an ideology based on the belief that people, goods, and information ought to be able to cross national borders unfettered. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. Let's get ready with your quiz. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.